It's 7 p.m. on a Sunday night, and you know what that means. It's Topical starts right now. Very good evening to South Africa, those watching around the world. My name is Blaine Herman, and this is indeed It's Topical. Our digital audience with us tonight, they'll pop up on your screen in a short while. One of them, in fact. Looking forward to getting their questions. That's Howard, in a short while. This week, we saw the swearing in of new members of parliament from the uMkhonto weSizwe party, as well as the economic freedom fighters. Some of the new MPs are well-known personalities. Some of the faces on your screen currently. Others are returning parliamentarians. Members of the MK party include former Prasa CEO Lucky Montana, former Transnet CEOs Siyabonga Gama, as well as Molefe and Mzwanele Manyi, who recently resigned from the EFF. He's there as well. Musician Eric Kobane, also known as Papa Penny, is also now a MK party MP, which leads us to the topical question of the week. And we're asking you, do you think South Africa has a formidable and a strong opposition in the MK party, given the just sworn-in members? Professor William Gumede wrote some time back that the role of opposition parties is critical in determining the level of accountability by governing parties and governments, the effectiveness of public service delivery, and I guess the overall quality of a country's democracy. Important. He's one of our guests tonight. We'll explore these and other issues with him in a short while. But how do you see it? What are the principles that matter given the political state of play? And who embodies those principles for you? Let us know at SABC News_TV. Let's walk and talk. Get you some context as always. To what extent does the quality of our democracy depend on an opposition party's efficiency? Yeah? Let us know at SABC News_TV. That's where we'll take some of your comments. We'll also get from our digital audience as well. And we might open up the lines as well. We'll let you know in a short while. More next. All right, let's tee it up for you, this discussion, what we know and why it matters. SABC News political reporter Natasha Piri joins me now live. Tash, good to have you on the program.
Thanks for having me.
Right, let's talk about the state of play with regards to the uMkhonto weSizwe party. Newly sworn in MK parties. Who stands out for you? What's been the reaction?
Sure. Okay. So in terms of the
Loaded
reaction,
question.
exactly. Internally within the party, remember you had those 18 MPs who were disgruntled, were actually expelled from the party. You have those 10 MPs who have taken the expulsion to court, and they claim that they were removed to make way for the likes of Lucky Montana, Molefe, Siyabonga Gama, Mzwanele Manyi, Papa Penny to actually come in. But you know, we spoke to the MK party spokesperson Tlamolo last week, and he had said that, listen, as MK, because they're trying to rebuild their structures, remember, Blaine, they've brought in the best of the best within Parliament to actually challenge the government of national unity. And Lucky Montana had said that his role would be to actually, he wants to bring back the SOEs to the days of its former glory. I remember we spoke to him specifically, and he had rebutted these state capture allegations against him, saying that there was nothing that actually substantial that actually stuck, upon these men. And when these men served in the SOEs, he called it the age of the golden era when they actually served there. So it's quite interesting to see what's going to happen in Parliament moving forward.
You have your ear to the ground. What are people saying? What's the sentiment on the ground?
Mixed reactions as well. Some have said that it's high time the likes of the MK party actually bring in people who are actually qualified, people who actually know what they're talking about. Remember, for the likes of Lucky Montana and Molefe, Parliament is nothing new to them, and Siyabonga Gama, as well as Mzwanele Manyi as well. So, and we all know that Mzwanele Manyi is actually the chief whip of the MK party. So according to them, these are skilled people that bring in experience to the party.
All right, I want to talk about structure. And we've been introduced to the party's high command. What are we learning about this, and what does it tell us about the future of the party?
So, like you've correctly said, you've got 8 officials which form part of the High Command, and you've got 45 additional members. But quite interestingly, the party had said that they are not going to an elective conference anytime soon. They still want to develop their structures on the ground, and of course, key to that will be the likes of Floyd Shubambu, who's the national organizer, Blaine. You also have the likes of Dr. Sfiso Maseko, who'd be working quite closely with Floyd Shubambu. But also, Sfiso Maseko has got quite an interesting history. I think people need to also Google where he comes from. He was once the head of infrastructure development for Gauteng Health in 2022. And there's just, some stories around how he actually got fired. You look at the likes of the former Minister of Police, Mr. Nathi Nhleko, who's the chairperson, of the party, and he'll preside over all the high command meetings and national gatherings of the MK party. It's a given. Former President Jacob Zuma, who's the head of the party, he'll give political and ideological leadership. You've got Dr. Tlhophe, who is the deputy president of the party. But what's interesting is that the party actually also wants to gear up to a policy conference that will formulate the policies of the party going forward.
Do we know when?
It's not so sure. We're not so sure as to when it'll happen, but it seems as if it's going to be something that's coming up close.
Which leads us to, I guess, the thinking behind a party like MK, and also further, the Progressive Caucus. This is the charter, by the way. And talk to us about, since the establishment of the so-called Progressive Caucus, what sort of progress has been made?
It's quite interesting. I actually called the chief whip of the party in Parliament, and Ndlamulo Ndlela, today, and he had told me that they've now agreed on an accord of key elements of the Progressive Charter, which we actually see right now. Like you said, the expropriation of land without compensation, nationalization of banks, mines, and etc. And what's interesting, Mr. Manyi had said that we need to look out of what's going to happen in Parliament later on this week. So according to Mr. Manyi, they say that they will be tabling a debate in Parliament later on this week to challenge the term GNU. You also know that the MK party actually took the SABC to court over this issue. They don't agree with the term GNU, and they've actually come out in public at their press conference to actually term the GNU as an enemy of the Progressive Caucus.
Natasha Piri, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you so much for your time, Blaine.
SABC News political reporter Natasha Piri. Their context always important with regards to the upcoming discussion. All right, to our regular word on the street feature, we explored various streets across Gauteng to capture a range of insights and perspectives on this topic. And this is what people had to say. Take a look.
I feel like we should give them a chance, MK, because it's a new party. I mean, and Zuma was once president at some time. So, I feel like we should just give them the benefit of the doubt. Give them at least 2 years.
I think it's a gravy train. They're looking out for their stomachs. I mean, just look at all of them. Brian Molefe, they're just looking out for their stomachs. Now, you can also consider that their stomachs.
I feel like we should give them a chance. We should give them a chance and see what they'll do, see how they will behave, see how they will approach the socio-economic challenges that we are facing as a country.
Well, everyone deserves a chance. Everyone's got mistakes. So we can only prove a person by what he does.
Jacob Zuma disappointed the country already, and there's no way they're going to lead. So they're not a good match in government. That's what I feel.
Jacob Zuma has been involved in corruption, I cannot believe, honestly speaking.
All right, really appreciate your thoughts on this. Let's get straight to the discussion. Two ideal guests to break it down and also look at the role of opposition within a democracy. Joining me in studio is MK Party member of the High Command, policy expert as well, Dr. Thanti Mthanti, as well as Professor William Gumede, founder. Let me take a deep breath because there's a lot here. Founder, executive chairperson of the Democracy Works Foundation and associate professor, School of Governance at Wits University. And he was also the independent chairperson of the Multi-Party National Convention last year. Thank you very much indeed for your time. Our digital audience as well with us. Appreciate your time. If you have any questions, jump in, We'll get your thoughts, we'll get your comments on this important issue. Dr. Mthanti, if I can start with you. You would agree that the voter is priority, is key. Having said that, with regards to the recently sworn in members, do you think, does the party believe wholeheartedly that this is what the voter wanted?
Yeah, I think so. I think people want competent people in government to partially hold this government to account. I mean, you've got a pretty incompetent government that hasn't achieved anything in 6 years. You can't point to one single success of this government. And a lot of our members who were sworn in Parliament, they've run SOEs, they've run government departments fairly successfully. They've clearly shown that they're competent and they can drive the development agenda in this country.
The allegations surrounding a few of the members, of course, it needs to go to court, it needs to be proven innocent until proven guilty. But do you worry that that might detract from the end game here or the goal that the MK party has?
Not necessarily, no. I don't think we're worried about that. Those allegations have been there for almost a decade now. 2015, 2014, that's where they emanate from. Our criminal justice system has not really processed them for whatever reason. I mean, people can't be expected to wait for a decade of their life to clear themselves. If the allegations are genuine, let them be processed by the criminal justice system, and the quicker they're processed. But what's happening in South Africa, I don't think it's a new phenomenon. I mean, we've seen it with our president. We've seen it with the former American president, Trump, where people are willing to actually go and vote for somebody who's got 4 criminal indictments. Yeah. But part of that is what's increasingly happening within the democratic space, that instead of litigating or discussing different policies, people are increasingly using the criminal justice system to settle political scores. And the public is seeing through that.
Is the public seeing through that, Professor Gumede? As Dr. Mthanti has mentioned the examples of in the US as well. Some months later, once the dust is settled, the intention of the electorate in terms of voting, giving us this government that we have now, has it become clearer in terms of what they intended to do?
I mean, first thing, just thank you for being on the program. I mean, the strength of a country's democracy and also a governing party's ability to deliver depends on the opposition parties. So often when we complain that the ANC as a governing party failed, they failed obviously because of their own sort of misgovernance, but also because the opposition parties haven't been effective and credible enough. And that's a really important thing to understand. Now, what is opposition party effectiveness? You know, what does it mean? I think the first thing is, in particular in a developing country, is party leaders will have to be credible, will have to present themselves and must look in the perception of citizens as alternative presidents of a country. You know, they have to get that right. Secondly, what they need to do, they have to oppose in a way that is common sense. You know, I mean, we've had previously, for example, parties like the Economic Freedom Fighters in the last cycle in Parliament. You know, they would shout and those sort of things. But that is not effective. That is theatre. A much more effective way would be to say, well, here is a particular thing that has gone wrong, and then offer alternative that sounds credible to the public. And the last one, but which is for me even more important in a developing country, that opposition parties must be at the grassroots level, almost a bit like civil society organizations. Let's say in Eldorado Park outside Johannesburg, there's a gang issue. So the opposition parties has to be their first responders. And that is very important from a credibility point of view.
Adding to the credibility, the more information the electorate gets, the better, right? With regards to the chopping and changing in terms of Parliament, is that being communicated to the ordinary citizen out there, the person that supported you at the party as a whole? my question would be is, do they have a clear understanding of the direction that the MK party is going in?
Yeah, I think the president has communicated that very well. I mean, the direction of MK is to be the next government. I think the most effective opposition is one that can credibly claim we can govern, right? And I think we're getting closer to that. And probably MK is the only party with serious governing experience. All of these individuals you're questioning me about have run major institutions. And most of them, they've run them well, they've run them successfully, they've been competent, and they've delivered on their mandates. I think that's the one thing that will become clearer over time. I mean, people are going to hear Brian Molefe question ministers over ESCOM. Who better? Who could potentially be better? People will hear Siyabonga Gama question ministers over Transnet. Who can say they've got more experience, better knowledge, more competence?
Well, there's the opinion is, I guess, divided on
crucial.
the issue. It's subjective, right? Because there are these allegations and it's yet to be proven. Do you think, Prof, that will detract from, as the good doctor is saying, the vision and the strategy that the MK is trying to go as being the alternative government?
Yes, I think so. There are two things that's going to be a major distraction point for MK. First thing is really something to do, there's been a challenge for our opposition parties, is parties are built around one figure. So the disadvantage for MK is another party built around former President Jacob Zuma. So if he's not there, the party can implode. I mean, that really is an important thing. Now, opposition parties, their longevity is measured if they can have two things. One, a successful leadership change at the top, and secondly, whether the public, ordinary citizens, can see other leaders of equal stature in a party. That's going to be. The second thing, there are many people and a couple of the new MPs now with clouds around their heads, which is not going to go away. Many of them will still face, face legal challenges. It's still open-ended, including former President Jacob Zuma, and that definitely. I mean, we could have an MK that could spend this cycle, which top leaders is just spent in court, dealing with issues and being unable actually to be an effective opposition.
Your thought on that, Doc?
President Zuma has been in court since when? It's almost 3 decades. And he's been effective. The truth is, like I'm saying, you've got the credibility of the courts and the credibility of the criminal justice system in this country amongst the broader populace is generally highly questionable. And individuals, highly competent individuals who've run major institutions, can't suspend their lives on the basis that a decade later they may or may not face charges. If there is a case, right, if the investigative authorities have a case, present it to the courts and deal with it swiftly. Otherwise, you'll have a case where individuals are removed from their right to participate politically on the basis that they have a cloud around their head, and they're removed for decades. And they're supposed to sit at home and wait until they decide, or whoever decides to process those cases. Listen, around the state capture cases, there's been more than sufficient time, right? There's been more than sufficient time to process them, right? Instead, the bigger issue seems to be to isolate certain individuals, make sure that they cannot play an appropriate role in society, keep them hanging, and not process them.
So you say this is political. It's a political game that's being played.
Well, I'm saying it seems like, otherwise the individuals would have been processed. I'm saying, what exactly are they supposed to do? What if I today, the allegations against me, right? Matters are not brought to court for a decade. What am I supposed to do? Sit at home, suck my thumb for a decade?
Fair enough. I mean, I was just reading a statement from the Hawks, and it was in June, and they were saying that in terms of matters relating to state capture, it sits around 29, they arrested 29, which includes 21 natural persons and 8 jurisdicted persons, which is the entity or corporation. But the work is continuing. But I get your point well made. I wonder when the doctor says about, you know, the former president being in court for 3 decades or so, is people becoming numb to this, or do they see it as the party would want us to realize as a political game, as a targeting of certain individuals?
You know, I think if we look at our last voting at the 29 May general election, 16 million people came to vote. 9 million people registered, but they didn't vote. Another group of people, perhaps the same amount, did not even bother to register. Now, there lies our problem. So what does it say to us about our political parties? It means that the majority of South Africans do not believe in the political parties that we have. And we've seen it also, even in the elections. So essentially what has happened in our country, the voting electorate hasn't enlarged the last 30 years. So what we've seen parties spinning off from either the ANC or the opposition, they say the DA, but the pool, the voting pool hasn't increased, although in real terms, more people have now become of age to vote, but they're not registering. And that must tell us something, that the political parties that we have now, whether it is the ANC or even MK and so on, may not be fit for purpose, in a big scenario for our country and for our citizens. That's why we have most citizens are not even voting at all. They're not participating.
I want to go to the digital audience, and Doc, you can respond to that once we come back to you. Let's go to Howard. Howard, I see your hand up first. Howard?
Yes, good evening, colleagues. Good evening, Mr. Blaine and everyone at home. The professor has laid down a good idea of having a nice opposition where there is an alternative to the running government as we have now. And of course, the doctor has talked about the people whom are now in parliament for MK having some bit of an experience here and there. Now, we understand that not all experience is good experience. And of course, the professor has told us that we now see that the MK itself has been centering around the character of Mr. Jacob Zuma, and perhaps we can say even now that the people who are now elected to be elected and yes, appointed to be going to parliament as MK party, they are now, of course, all of them connected in one way or another to the former president. Now, my question is that what has been the criteria, if any, and perhaps the doctor can answer this, what has been the criteria, if any, of appointing those people to becoming parliamentarians, except for the fact that they all have experience? Because I disagree that all of them has got like good experience to say we can run the country in to the best of our ability. Now, and again, this question is quite important because we have seen the president, while he was still a president, reshuffling during odd hours. And of course, I'm concerned because we don't want to end up seeing this happening again. Already it has happened to some extent with the first batch of parliamentarians. Now, what has been the criteria to choose the current ones that have now been put forth? Thank you very much.
Let me put it to Dr. Mthanti. The criteria of selecting?
Largely competence. I think what we've been dealing with is an incompetent government. Right? A lot of the people who've been taken to parliament have a record of delivery. Brian Molefe at the PIC, at Transnet, at Eskom, Siyabonga Gama at Transnet, Lucky Montana at Prasa. All those institutions were functional under them. They were functional under President Zuma. People were held to account, If they didn't perform, they were fired, right? Under this incompetent president, there's hardly a single minister who's fired. You've got the water system in the country breaking down, who has been fired. You had the passenger rail system collapsing, who has been fired. You had the goods rail system, right? The ports, right? Exports, imports building up at the ports.
Right.
Who has been held accountable? You've had policing collapse. Right. Who has been held accountable?
So what mechanisms does the party have? These allegations.
I really want to emphasize this point. Some of the key issues in government is competence.
Right.
Being able to do the job.
Right.
Being able to make sure that there's chalk delivered in schools, schools function, that the trains run and run on time, right? That the country can function. This country is practically collapsing over the last 6 years under an incompetent individual who is supposedly clean, who no charges are ever brought against, and where there is seemingly a record of consistent criminal behavior. So the point I'm trying to get to is the legal system here seems again to have eyes.
Prof, I want to come to you, but I just want to get this point in terms of structure within the MK party. Does the party have standard operating procedures in terms of code of conduct, etc., to hold people who might eventually be found guilty of certain things or not? But if they are, is there structures currently in place to hold people accountable?
Well, Judge Lope chairs the National Disciplinary Committee. That's who would have to process that. There is a disciplinary committee. People will be held accountable if they need to be, and there is concrete evidence to that effect. But we can't hold people accountable on the basis of rumors, right? There are other bits that we hear people harping on about MK this, that. MK is 6 or 7 months old. It's a party information. It was a party that almost immediately went into an election campaign. Right now, the party, the structures throughout the country are being rolled out. Right. The party is a party information. And the president is working very hard to make sure. I mean, you guys have talked about leadership. I don't know which party out in Parliament has greater leadership depth. People are joining the party. People are joining. Senior leaders are joining the party. I don't know if we've ever had an opposition party with the ability to attract senior political leaders, experienced leaders like MK.
Prof, you want to jump in?
Yes, I think MK is structurally vulnerable. I mean, the party doesn't have a constitution. And I think maybe, I mean, from a governance point of view, we'll have to really look at how do we register parties, which parties are allowed to stand. If you don't have a constitution as a party, do we allow the party to stand for elections? So I think we have to tighten, from where I'm sitting, really lessons learned, how do we tighten that? Because can you have a party, a political party, that doesn't have a constitution? And the other thing in terms of, because the party is built around one leader, if you fall out with a leader, you're gone. I mean, that creates an instability. I mean, that was also the difficulty, for example, when President Cyril Ramaphosa tried to negotiate a coalition with MK and also with the EFF. I mean, the difficulty there was that MK was not predictable and reliable, because if there's no constitution, where's the leaders? If a party like that gets into a coalition, if people get fired all of the way, just imagine somebody who's a cabinet minister, the president wakes up of the party and decide, well, that person has to be out, and then the whole government collapses. Right.
I'll go back to Doc. I'm going to bring you in. Without a constitution, does the party, first of all, have a constitution?
It does. Can you register a party in South Africa without a constitution? No, I'm just asking, can you?
Can I just...
You can't.
I mean, you know, the members of parliament, they were fired from MK.
Yes.
They're now in court. That's the allegation that they've made in court
That's
papers.
the allegation that they have made. There's a constitution lodged with the IEC. Can you register a party in South Africa without a constitution?
So you're saying
you
that
can't.
there is a constitution
You
within
can't.
the MK,
I'm saying
right.
you can check with the IEC that can you register a party without a constitution? You can't.
Right.
So the whole issue that MK doesn't have a constitution is misplaced because you cannot register a party without a constitution. The issue is MK maybe hasn't gone to conference.
How far are we from the elected conference?
parties that are far older than MK. Has ATM gone to conference? Has Action SA gone to conference?
But
how do you expect
how do you see
the party,
how
these
far
are
are we
parties
from
that are 3,
the MK
4, 5
elective
years
conference?
old. Listen, right now I think the focus is on establishing structures, verifying membership, establishing branches, as the speech that was outlined. And with that done, when the structures are established throughout the country, at that point, when the party is ready for conference, it will go to conference. But it is not immediate. There's hardly been a party in South Africa that went to conference within 6 months of being formed. Were we supposed to be formed at a conference?
What informed the higher command of the MK party currently, the people that have been appointed to these positions? How was that taken?
I think a lot of the guys, it's the work they've done within the party, their record of activism, generally speaking. And one of our key criteria is obviously they can't be in government, right? And they need to be able to play different roles in society. But some of the criticism, just to return to the point I was making, some of the criticism against MK is misplaced. Nobody's asking why is Action SA, which has been there for 4 years or whatever, why has it not gone to conference? ATM, parties like that, a party that has been formed for 6 or 7 months, that just fought an election campaign, is asked about an elective conference. Then the other criticism is that there are no policies, there's no whatever. There was a full-on manifesto that we went to the electorate with. We called it the People's Mandate. People never bothered to read it, and they say there are no policies, everything is just by the whim, right? Or now the criticism is there's no constitution. Yet legally in South Africa, you cannot register a party without a constitution.
Is that the standard, Prof? Is that the bar in terms of a manifesto serving as policy? Number one. And number two, given what Doctor is saying, and given the length of the party and its existence, is it fair to say that, okay, it's been a short period of time, and measuring from other parties, etc., we kind of in that same realm?
I mean, actually, that's actually the problem with our opposition parties. I mean, if we're going to say a party has been there for 4 years or for 7 months and didn't have a conference, now how credible is that party? I mean, for voters to trust parties that that haven't done that, how legitimate are these parties? I mean, how professional, how are you going to get into government and be credible if you don't do those basic things? It's all about political parties, and maybe that's actually at the heart of the failure of our opposition parties, and why voters are totally disgruntled, because the majority of the voters are disgruntled. I mean, yes, the party could get 14% or EFF 9%, but the wider society, I mean, there are over 30 million voters out there who are totally dissatisfied. But I just have to, I think, respectfully correct also something else. It's the issue on that the last 6 years of government is where all the failure happens. The failure happened during the Zuma presidency. Now, the way government failures work generally, and it's not only in South Africa, everywhere around the world, normally what happens, a government is in power, and if the government mismanages and corruption and so on, a country doesn't see it immediately. It comes afterwards. It's like, let's like a Prasa or a Transnet, for example. The first 5 years of people in charge, it looks good, but it's corrupt, it breaks, and then eventually it breaks down until it gets a tipping point where the whole thing collapsed. So the tipping point was when all of our systems collapsed was during the Ramaphosa presidency, but the basis of the collapse were laid, during the Zuma presidency. And the Ramaphosa failure of the Ramaphosa presidency was not to, to close the gap and start performing better.
Dr. Mthanti, I just want to let you respond, then we need to take a quick break, and then we'll go back to our digital audience. Your response.
Response to the failure in the Zuma years. I think President Zuma can be very proud of his years in government. I mean, when he came in, we had a massive healthcare crisis, right? Life expectancy, I think, was around 54. It rose quite sharply during his presidency to somewhere in the mid-60s, because that healthcare crisis was dealt with. Educational attainments, both on secondary and tertiary education. I mean, the metric pass rates did excellently well. We had the largest infrastructure program, one of the largest infrastructure investments in the world, one of the largest this country has ever seen. The numerous successes that you can count. Be that as it may, I just want to address this point that the failures started under him. Operational financial performance of Transnet, Prasa, etc., right, started to declined after he left the presidency. When he left the presidency, Transnet was solvent. Highly profitable, investing in its network, right?
Right.
Eskom, load shedding had been dealt with. Balance sheets
that's another whole other issue altogether. There's numerous variables.
Well, numbers don't tend to lie. Balance sheets was comparatively clean. Primary energy costs were around 85 billion.
Right.
They have almost doubled. I'm sure this year they'll come in at around 170 billion. Last year they were 154 billion. So I just want to, sometimes we talk about corruption, lack of performance. We don't look at the financials. We don't look at the operational performance. We just glibly use words that these entities were failing, they were not functional. And yet, when you look at them operationally, financially, it's almost like the last years of his presidency, they were at their peak.
I want to park it there. I want to come back with your response, Professor Gumede, as well as Molefe and Zita will get your take in a short while. We need to take a quick break. We'll explore other issues in terms of opposition parties, the structure, the policies that they have, and how it contributes to democracy. More after the break. Welcome back. You're watching It's Topical. Topical question of the week. You saw new members being sworn in to Parliament as members of Parliament, especially from the uMkhonto weSizwe party. And we ask you, with regards to these new members coming in, as well as the party as a whole, do you think that the MK party is a formidable, powerful opposition party taking this country forward? Let us know at SABC News_TV. We've got our digital audience here. Hands up already. Molefe, let's get your question, comment. Oops, it seems like Molefe is frozen. David Zita, let's hear from you.
Oh, thank you very much, Mr. Blaine. When I look into the formidable team that brought in by MK, it permits me to say to not degree. Why to not degree? There are pejoratives which will act as a sentimental conscience. Why am I saying sentimental conscience, Mr. Blaine? Those members we are talking about, they have a political ideology. But political ideology alone, it must be wired and ushers with an idea. I guess some members, they do have that. But should we say it, MK are acting as a house of exile? MK are not political blooded. Because when you look at the structure the way it is, we happen to check that all these members we are talking about, are they having what's so-called political principle of law. And if you don't have political principle of law, it means, one, you are a danger to the society. You are a danger to the a political party that you came from. You are a danger to the international politics that you are claiming to be part of it. All those members we are talking about, they are coming from different political parties. What comes into my mind is a political term that said there is a political vanguard. And it sounds so nice when we revisit it, a political principle law in Latin plane, when it says that the de niminis lex non curante. The question is, are they, those members, being credible enough that we should trust, knowing that they have what's so called vanguard?
Thanks,
because of
David.
Time plate, I beg to return to my seat. Thank you.
Thank you. Molefe, let's hear from you before we get a response.
Good evening, Blaine. Good evening to the viewers and the panel inside. I just have a quick comment to make. I think we have now realized that we are in a coalition type of setup in the country. And for me personally, I do not believe that we have a strong enough opposition that will be able to hold the executive to account. The executive meaning the Grand Coalition or the Government of National Unity. Because as cliche as it might sound, the Government of National Unity is putting up a very united front in executing their duties, and they are filling holes that previously with a party that was in majority was not filling in those roles. And now we have a government of a Black Progressive Caucus that is now fighting to be at the forefront. So there's a leadership crisis within those so-called Black Progressive Caucus. And that then leads to a power struggle. And at the end of the day, we need to understand that politics is a game of power. Right. But the Black Progressive Caucus, also the opposition, is not doing enough to put pressure on the Grand Coalition, because they themselves are having internal squabbles and internal fights, and that then leads to the GNU being able to flourish in whatever they are attempting to do.
Right. Prof, how does an opposition or the role of an opposition change under the current circumstances, the GNU, the current government arrangement? How does it look in terms of optics and also the effective way of dealing and holding the executive to account?
I mean, you know, it's going to be critical that we have opposition where, none of the opposition party leaders are corrupt or perceived to be corrupt. Otherwise, they're not going to have the credibility to hold the government accountable. I mean, that's just what it is. Secondly, that they have the skill set. The opposition must have the skill set. I mean, running a government is complex, and a national government. So the opposition must have their skill set. I mean, the problem in the past, for example, with the EFF, when they were the opposition previously, is, very, very good as activists. But when you oppose, you're going to have to be able to read, the reports from the AG, know exactly what's happening. Maybe one of the things that the MK brings, which is a little bit different, let's say, from the EFF, there are some people who have run entities, not necessarily, and here again, I must add a rider to that. Often there's a misplaced focus on experience. I mean, often is the experience is people who ran entities into the ground, and then that is ticked off as experience. That is not the kind of experience we want. We want positive experience, somebody who's turned around a company and so on. But be it as it may, we need opposition. One, as I say, credible leadership, no corruption. Secondly, the parties of those parties must also be coherent. If you're going to have people are going to be fired, somebody's going to wake up, the president of the party just decide to kick somebody out, and so on. That's not coherent. That's not a consistent. We need a consistent opposition parties, and that's also the problem even with the EFF under Julius Malema. Finding people at random who don't agree and so on. I mean, it just means that opposition parties are chaotic.
Yeah. Doctor, how would you convince or convey the message that the MK party is not built around one person?
Well, I think the critical issue is just look at the leadership. Look at the people, partially you've been beaming in your studio, right? President Zuma himself, the chairperson, Nathi Nhleko, minority leader in parliament, Judge Tlhophe, Brian Molefe. How many opposition parties, Floyd Chivambu, that I hadn't mentioned, how many opposition parties can claim to have such leadership or leadership of such stature? That's one. I think the other part is, for the first time, South Africa actually has an opposition party, because the DA knew it couldn't be government.
So all the names that you've mentioned...
Let me finish.
Sure.
Let me just finish. The DA knew it could never be government. They were happy with their 20% of the vote, right? The ANC knows that MK will be government. President Zuma has run a government before. He's working very hard to build a party that will take the ANC out of government. He's working very hard. He's already brought the ANC, even with the shenanigans of potential vote rigging or whatever, he's brought the ANC from whatever it was to below 40%. Yeah, to 39 something percent. He's working very hard. I mean, a lot of the people, what they point is instability, right? We within the party see it as an individual, our leader, singularly focused on building the next government. And that is actually what he's doing, because you've never also seen an opposition party in this country attract such senior leaders from other parties.
So let's talk about those senior leaders to the point that Professor was making. Post the elective conference, all those names that you've mentioned, they have an equal chance of taking over the mantle as leader.
Yeah.
Are you saying?
Well, what I'm saying is the elective conference will be the elective conference, and whatever leadership emerges from there. What I was being asked, the question I was being asked, was the leadership depth in the MK. I'm asking what opposition party has ever had such leadership depth? And more are going to join. More are going to join. What you are seeing with MK is almost every week new, credible, or new senior leaders are joining, which is partially why we're having this discussion. And I'm asking you, what opposition party in the last 30 years have had the ability to attract leaders of such high quality and caliber? It's the only one. And if I may just emphasize, the ANC is actually facing the first time it's facing actual opposition. It's the first time it's facing being totally removed from power, and MK will remove it.
I wonder, Professor, how the electorate defines depth within a party. Is it experience? Is it personality? How has that changed, that perception changed?
You know, can I make just a sort of a big challenge in that context? You know, for a country to deliver the jobs, like our country with its inequality and high levels of poverty, we need different kind of leaders than the existing leaders. We don't need the Jacob Zumas and even the Julius Malemas are not the kind of leaders appropriate for developing countries in poverty. Right? That's a very important thing.
Why not?
So countries, if you look the last 100 years at countries that came out of poverty and became very rich countries, the leaders that have, firstly, emotionally mature leaders, that's the first. Secondly, leaders that are pragmatic. And then thirdly, leaders that are technically competent. When I say technical competent, is somebody that has run something outside politics before. Not, you know, a business, a business, or anything outside. Because that's critical, because in a developing country, it's not the politics that's the experience that matters, is the technical and organizational experience outside of politics.
But Dr. Mthanti will argue that they have that, and the number of names that they've put forward.
I mean, the first response, if you look at, I mean, many of those individuals actually ran the institutions into the ground. And we're sitting, even Ramaphosa, when he became the president, he got the pass of a Jacob Zuma presidency where individuals in the state-owned entities had actually near collapsed the state-owned entities.
Let's go to our digital audience, get the last one. Howard, let's hear from you.
Yes, and I would like just to extend what the professor is saying, that indeed, because we have the current people who are now appointed to parliament being the ones who were taking part during the times where apparently the fall began during the Zuma years, and then now they're put back to be some kind of heroes who are going to now salvage us from these situations. Perhaps I would like to get an understanding or an answer to from the doctor regarding that. How do we know for sure that these individuals are going to be the ones to put the country out of this trouble that we do have now, given that they have taken part in the fall of the country during the times where, of course, Mr. President Zuma was still president at the time? Thank you.
Dr. Mthanti, maybe to add to that while you answer Howard's question is, what can the voter expect of the MK party as an opposition in Parliament? What assurances does, to Howard's point, can you give that these people that are representing the people that voted you in, they're going to bring some sort of change, positive change for the electorate?
Look, I think the masses on the ground are more or less very clear. That's why MK basically formed 5 months before the election, performed the way it did, right? I mean, it was a stunning performance to some degree, something we haven't actually quite seen in this country. What I can't help is if a person has a religious belief that, you know, Transnet, Prasa, Eskom collapsed under Jacob Zuma when they reached, I mean, there was the report by the technical experts at Eskom. They say the best operational performance was 2016 and 2017. If people religiously believe that those institutions collapse when they all reached their peak operational and some reached, no, empirically, because you can verify, right, the passenger trips that were taken on Prasa. It's not what you think or what you wish. You can verify, say, the amount of product, coal, manganese, that was delivered by Transnet. You can verify the energy availability factor by Eskom, right? You can also verify what the financial performance in the balance sheet was like. It's not a religious belief. It's not an opinion. Those are facts, right? But if you want to or you wish to religiously believe that those entities collapsed when they were at their peak performance, I can't help you.
Right.
If you can't be convinced by the facts and you believe that entities, I mean, Transnet reached its record performance in terms of volume shipped, 2017, 2018. So what I'm saying is, if you wish to religiously believe, because partial of media propaganda, or you don't understand financial statements, or whatever, if you wish to religiously believe that Brian Molefe collapsed Eskom, I cannot help you.
Prof, I have to wrap it up. But to Dr. Mthanti's point, as we close, a lot of people voted for the MK party. A lot of people are convinced by their arguments. They've got 58 seats in the 400-seat National Assembly. Huge responsibility. Your final thoughts?
You know, people are very desperate because ANC didn't deliver. But I don't think parties like the MK party are the appropriate party to deliver for people. Firstly, just in terms of, if you don't have the caliber of leader, if you don't have leaders that have the maturity and leaders that have the technical capacity, you're not going to deliver for people who honestly think that MK will deliver. But you know, it's a mismatch between the leaders. It's like when we recycling the people that cause us the crisis that we've got in the country now, and to expect the same people now to deliver, you know, heaven, they can deliver how?
Thank you so much for your time, Professor Gumede. Dr. Mthanti, we appreciate your time. It's obviously a conversation that we continue to have. No doubt we'll love to have you guys back in. Let's see how the next couple of months go on, and then we'll get an assessment. But thank you very much indeed to our digital audience as well. Appreciate your time. All right, before we go, here's my take. Opposition can't become a position, right? You can't oppose just for the sake of opposing. It has to be deeper than that. And the voters need to be top of mind when you oppose. Having said that, it can't always be the blame game. It's about changing the game for what the greater good. Who benefits? The voter, you and your family. You're picking up on this golden thread, right? Voters' interests has to weave through all the decision making. Question, is it about people or is it about you, the politician? Is it about justice or just us? Answer those questions truthfully, and you'll have the makings of a force, a strong opposition that contributes to the success of this country's democracy. And that's my take. Speaking about democracy, Democracy 30 up next. Until next week, take care. Bye-bye.